Welcome to the Feast Presents video series. This is video number 10, and we will be discussing the Matthew 24 text today as we continue on in our series. It is imperative that people watch the first 8 videos before they continue watching any of those that come afterwards if you want to understand what's actually going on in the scriptures, so you can have a context in which to understand the rest of the things that I am suggesting in these other videos. So I encourage you to do that. It'll be well worth your time and effort. But today we're going to be discussing Matthew 24. Lots of confusion and arguing over this particular passage. And we'll also be going into Matthew 25 regarding some of the issues as well. Most people don't realize, but Matthew 24 and 25 are part of the same discourse that Jesus has with his disciples at the same occasion. So they're not two separate occasions, they're one occasion. And Jesus expands in chapter 25 what he finishes up with in chapter 24. And so it's not possible to understand 25 without understanding what Jesus discusses at the end of chapter 24. So the biggest issue you have with Matthew 24 is the fact that people fail to realize that Jesus is answering 3 very specific questions that his disciples asked him. And in doing so, he answers each one in the same order in which they were asked of him. And if we don't make that distinction and try to cram all of chapter 24 into whatever eschatology or end times ideas and what is coming in the future and whatnot, it becomes very confusing. In fact, keep in mind some of the verses that are actually used in Matthew 24 that were actually fulfilled in either before or around 70 A.D., and they are used and applied today. In fact, as coming from a missionary family, we even talk about, having the gospel preached to the entire world, so Jesus will come back and those kind of things. And we take verses from Matthew 24 regarding things that actually happened back in 70 A.D., and we apply them to today. This is a huge mistake, and so Matthew 24 becomes very straightforward and pretty simple to understand, actually, in terms of identifying what is, what Jesus is talking about in terms of what question. And then from there you can apply them to whatever the specifics are in that section as we go forward. So the first question that Jesus answers is in regards to what was fulfilled in 70 A.D. or leading up to it. The other 2 questions are being fulfilled as I speak, beginning in the 1900s, essentially, and they will be completed in 2027, as the scriptures suggest. And in fact, September 30th, 2027, if in fact Jesus keeps continuing the pattern he started in the cross event and Pentecost, we will see it happen in that specific time. Now, I've discussed in other videos about this idea of no man knowing the day or the hour, and this is the chapter it's taken from, and so we'll discuss that a little bit more, maybe with some more specifics as we come to it. So let's get started, and we'll begin with the setting as Jesus goes up to the temple, and the disciples are going to want to show off the temple to him and show him around and whatnot. And in the course of it, Jesus suggests something regarding the temple, and out of that the disciples ask 3 specific questions. So Jesus answers those questions in the remaining part of the chapter. Here's how it reads. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, First question, tell us, when shall these things be? In reference to the temple and the stones not standing upon each other and all of them thrown down. And then they ask, and what shall be the sign of thy coming? And also they ask, what shall be the sign of the end of the world? Now, it's important to understand that the end of the world here is not talking about the cosmos. The word is aeon, A-I-O-N in the Greek, and it means age. So what is the end of the age? And this is, from what we understand from Scripture, that leads into what is called the millennial 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. So the sign of Jesus coming, when he does come to rule on earth for 1,000 years, and the sign of the end of that time period. What are the signs leading up to that time period when he does come? So there's three questions here. The first question is answered, if you're following along in Matthew 25, which I encourage, is answered between verses 4 and 20. Jesus then introduces a transitional statement, because at the time of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and moving forward, Jesus suggests there's going to be a terrible time of tribulation in the world, and that even until the end of the age, there's not anything that was worse than what's coming, starting in 70 AD and finishing in 2027, essentially. So we have to understand this transitional statement in the context in which Jesus gave it. So he's first dealing with everything leading up to the destruction of the temple and the things associated with that. And then he moves on to this sign of his coming, the coming of the Son of Man, and the end of the world, or the end of the age. All right, so moving forward then, Jesus begins to answer this. And you'll notice some of these verses that are used in the next several are some that we like to apply to today. But these are not. These are specifically for the time leading up to the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the temple. So Jesus says, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. And all these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. All of this is in reference to what is going to occur prior to, or leading up to, or during 70 AD and the destruction of the temple. This idea of the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, the word there can be applied more relevantly as region. And thus, it was a witness unto all nations. So, the point being is that in the Mediterranean region, where Paul and others and the disciples traveled all around the Mediterranean, into all the Roman Empire, essentially, around there, this gospel spread. And it was a witness from this region to the rest of the world. Jesus is suggesting that after the gospel essentially saturates this area, or is at least brought to this area in full, then this time period will end. This is not talking about the end of the world. It's not talking about anything beyond 70 AD. So reading on then, we're picking it up in verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, which stands in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then, I think I just messed up here, but anyway, let me go back. Verse 15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, understand that then let them who be in Judea flee into the mountains. And I've got a couple of parentheses in my notes here, so bear with me. What I did was I took a passage from Luke chapter 21 that also refers to this, that has more information. So I added it in here for our benefit, because there's one little thing that was very key to this in Luke that's not in Matthew, and it says, when ye shall see Jerusalem encompassed with armies. And then Luke and Matthew say, let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Okay? So, what we need to know is that when we see this Jerusalem being encompassed and the abomination of desolation set up, that Daniel spoke about, and being placed in the holy place, it's time to get out. And we know from history that a Roman army came through and camped around Jerusalem in around 70 AD. And that was the sign. Now some say, well, what's the point of trying to flee after you're surrounded? Well, the point is that army stayed for a while, got up, and left. And then another army came in, camped around Jerusalem, and destroyed Jerusalem. They came in and wiped it out. So in between the one army and the other, there was a time for people to get out. And so this is a very important clue to the Christians living in Judea and Jerusalem specifically, to get out and to flee to the mountains. So during this same time, you had abomination of desolation set up. There were idols put into the temple by the rulers that be. And so we see this all fulfilled in or around 70 AD. The reference in Daniel, let me make a point here, that in Daniel 11:31 is the abomination of desolation that's being spoken of here. Do not confuse this with Daniel 12 and verse 11, where it also talks about an abomination of desolation being set up. That, as we've discussed earlier, is a reference to the Dome of the Rock, a completely different prophecy that Daniel is dealing with in terms of the time frame. We know from our study in Daniel, chapter 10 through 12, in previous videos, that chapter 11 was a summary of events that happened over the course of 2,000 years, beginning back in Daniel's time and Darius coming to power, and then proceeding all the way to approximately 1870 to 1829 time frame. Okay, and so somewhere along the line there, you'll come across 70 AD, and Daniel in there references this idea of this abomination of desolation set up. So that gives us kind of an anchor point within Daniel 11, actually, of when this occurred and what he was referring to specifically, as mentioned here by Christ. Daniel 11:31, let me read that verse for you just for reference. It says, "And arms shall stand on his part," and talking about this prince or person that's coming against Jerusalem. So arms will stand on his behalf, or on his part. He'll place them there, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So the temple being destroyed caused the sacrifice to be completely done away with, and he may have actually interfered with that earlier. The abomination was set up. Even the soldiers were setting up idols and all kinds of different things. You can read the history on that. It's very well documented. So moving on, Jesus transitions now into the last part, and then we go on to the transition towards the terrible time that's coming. So finishing out, beginning in 17, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath. So essentially he's saying, get out quick. Don't take time to pack up everything and get out. Hopefully you're not, pregnant, and hopefully you're not having to be nursing a baby, and hopefully it doesn't happen in winter or on a Sabbath day, because they weren't permitted to run on do work on a Sabbath. So anyway, the point being, it's urgent that you get out as soon as possible and flee to the mountains. All these things happened in that time frame leading up to 70 AD. So now we move forward into this transitional statement. Jesus says, "For then shall be great tribulation." So we clearly see that this is something coming after the fleeing is to take place, okay? Because, you're fleeing, and now here's what's going to happen. "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." So we know this is going to be, in our context, we know this is going to be a long period of time coming forward, okay? That we're in a time frame when there's going to be tribulation, that when we get to the millennium, there's essentially, it's not going to be near as bad as what we have now. And except those days be shortened, there should be no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So here we get a clear reference to really leading up to what's going to happen in 2027. And actually, we will discover in Matthew 24 that the time frame Jesus gives for his return has to happen sometime before 2029. And we know that from Daniel, he tells us that the time is going to be 2027. So, in essence, what we see here is that, yes, the time is actually shortened. It's less than 2029, and in which the frame is set later on by Christ as being the maximum frame. So here we see this idea of this great tribulation beginning, and this is going to continue on for a very long time. But the elect are going to be preserved because Jesus is going to shorten the days of this. Otherwise, it's possible no flesh would survive it. That's a pretty severe statement. In Daniel 12, 1 and 2, it says this: "At that time shall Michael stand up, the prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written